David Bedford, Beatles historian, noted Beatles historian. Love talking with David. I've had multiple conversations with him. Um, he's from Liverpool. If you're ever in Liverpool, you need to find him. He gives a Beatles tour. You can't understand the Beatles unless you're there and understand where they grew up and the clubs they've been to. But we talk about Peter Jackson's great documentary, Get Back, a 3-part series on Disney Plus. We talk about all 3 episodes. We kind of play a little bit of a game at the end where I call myths busted and winners and losers. What myths were we told by the Beatles that were myths, that were not true, by the press, by whoever, by other documentations, right? Documentary movies. And also winners and losers. Who are the winners and losers in the documentary? Yoko Ono, the Beatles themselves, Paul, John, George, Ringo. Excellent conversation with David. Love talking Beatles with him. We love talking about the great documentary by Peter Jackson, Get Back. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. To talk to you. David Bedford, how are you?
I'm good. I am good.
So, I've got so many questions. So, overall, first impressions, overview of the Get Back, the great documentary from Peter Jackson. Thoughts?
Has there been one? I hadn't seen any publicity at all.
I got to mention to you. You've got to watch that before we talk. Sorry.
Oh, I mean, the whole world has been consumed. I think almost every conversation I've had with anybody has been about Get Back.
Is that right?
Yeah. And it seems a while ago. Yeah, it's not that long ago, but
right.
I was trying to think what's it going to be like. So the first thing I went and did was I watched Let It Be, the original Michael Lindsay Hogg film.
Oh, smart.
And I hadn't watched that in years. And I think as Beatles fans, we've had this idea in our head that it was all really negative, all infighting, and the beginning of the Beatles breaking up. And it wasn't. So I was pleasantly surprised at the original Let It Be film. So I thought, okay, if that's the tone of it, I reckon there's going to be some good stuff. And of course, it was compelling. And the way Peter Jackson has done it, you think to somebody, like, sit down, give up 3 evenings, spend hours and hours watching these 4 guys doing their thing. You couldn't take your eyes off it. Yeah. It was compelling. It was dramatic. That was the great thing about it, because there's so much stuff we just didn't know about it. I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And the way it was edited, the way it was done. I mean, I just happened to take a look at Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm not sure it's big.
Oh, yes.
It's 92%, very high. But so, the first episode is the first 7 days, and they're at Twickenham, the studios there.
Yeah.
which they don't really like. It's kind of big and it's, but they
Yeah,
have 3 weeks and to create 14 songs.
yeah. Now, before we get to Twickenham,
Yes.
right, I have a point to make, and I get on my soapbox at this point. You know what I'm
Please.
like? Stickler for detail.
Okay.
Okay. The opening sequence, which gives us the context,
Yes.
right? Starting from the beginning and
Ah,
getting you up to 69. There's so many basic mistakes in it.
I forgot
It
about
drives
that
me mad.
montage. I forgot about
Yeah.
the montage. Yeah, there was a
And
yeah.
it starts there. See, Liverpool, right? They get the city right. I'll give them that. That's a good start, right? Okay. And then they say 1956. Then they play the Quarrymen from 1958. Show you a photograph of the Quarrymen with John in 1957.
The famous one. They're
And
outside, right?
yeah, in St.
Yeah.
Peter's. Yeah,
It's,
6th of
yeah.
July,
Yeah.
57. Okay, no, which is fair
Yeah.
enough
Yes.
because there's no photos in 56.
Right.
But then they get Paul and George at the wrong age. Somebody has got their ages wrong
Wow.
because they've calculated it as if it was 1956 when all this was happening, when the Quarrymen started. So Paul's the wrong age, George is the wrong age.
Wow.
It's simple stuff. How can you get two? There's only four of the Beatles we're talking about here, and they get
Sure.
two of them get their age wrong. I mean, come on,
What were you
honestly.
slapping your forehead during that? What were you? Were you beside yourself? Were you...
I was just thinking, oh, what is going on here? I mean, do you know what it looked to me when you look at the rest of it is just it's magnificent the way it's been
Yes.
done.
Yes.
That's like 2 days before it's going live. Oh hell, we better put something at the beginning so people get the context of where we're up to. And they just delegated it to somebody and said, look, just throw something together. We know what happened. And it's been done. And it just looks, it just doesn't fit in with the rest of what's
Mm,
there. It just doesn't seem right. So, they get some basic stuff wrong. And they then show the Beatles with John, Paul, George, and Ringo in the cavern performing. Then they tell us that Brian discovered the Beatles in the cavern and became the manager. Yeah, well, Brian became the manager at the end of 1961, which was, because Ringo didn't join till the end of August 62. When Brian became the manager, it was John, Paul, George, and Pete.
mm.
And they've got that the wrong way round
Wow.
as well. So it's simple stuff. It's simple stuff. They probably spent a little bit too long on the bigger than Jesus thing.
Mm.
But they had to do a bit of that because I think they had to show
Just touch
why
it.
they
Yeah.
gave up touring,
Right.
which was important. So it wasn't well thought out,
Mm.
and yet for the rest of the hours and hours that we sat and watched it, every second was important. The bit they threw on at the beginning, it's like as an intern somewhere. Hey, our kid, this is a band in the '60s you may have heard of. Go and throw something together for me.
It's so funny. I forgot completely about the montage. I just because I was so concerned that there was going to be like talking heads during this, where it was had the
Yeah.
Beatles, and then they would go away and like quote unquote experts would talk about what they and they
Oh
Jackson never did that. It
no,
was
thankfully.
just the Beatles, yes. And so after the montage, it's like, well, this is like every other Beatles thing I've seen, and
Yeah.
I didn't go into I don't know the depth as you do, but I just completely forgot about that. Wow, that's
It's probably the best thing
fascinating.
to do. Forget about it.
Really?
Yeah.
Did it last long? I don't even. Was it 10 minutes?
Too long. Yes. No, I mean it was important because you had to, for those who aren't as insane as me, you've got to give the context of
Right.
this is why they're doing this. At the beginning of 1969, they've been through all the Beatlemania. They've given up touring for very, very good reasons.
Right.
In 1966, they've just become a studio band, and that gets referenced a number of times through the series. So that is important. So it's important to do it. Just a simple phone call. They could have texted me anything like that. We could have sorted that so quickly. Oh dear.
I wish you would have let me know. I would have told him my good friend David, but Peter Jackson and I, we don't talk. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah. So Twickenham, the way it
Yeah.
was shot and the way, what was the one flower that I couldn't get my eye off all the time? There was like one during the whole, it was just the way it was done and just the way they brought everything together. The first 7 days after the montage there, it was compelling. And the way George leaves and he kind of makes kind of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
And but how about when he has George and Paul recorded, like he put a microphone in a flower and he has them recorded?
I want to know more about that because who had said, I tell you what, just in case they sneak
Right.
off to the canteen, let's go and bug them by putting a microphone in a flower pot? What? I mean,
It's
ah,
crazy.
that has so many questions.
It does. It does. 60 hours of film and 150 hours of audio. But
Yeah.
right away, we learn that these four men love each other,
Oh,
right?
they're like brothers.
They were like
Absolutely.
brothers.
It's family.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no animosity. We're going to talk about myths a little later and lies we were
Yeah.
told and what you said. I mean, these four men loved each other.
Yeah.
And it was they've been through so much at this point. It's what, January of 1969,
Yep.
and they've been through Help and Shea Stadium and Sullivan and you know uh, Hamburg and just everything. They've been through so much together,
Yep.
and these four men, and even when George leaves, it's not like, hey, screw you guys, I'm out of here. It was nothing of that. It's just kind of, all right, I'm off. Just kind of
Yep. See you around the
leaves.
clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and there's a little bit of argument. We not really argument, but Paul kind of wants to have some things done, and there's just like discussion back and forth. But and the shocking thing, Dave, is we all know that George leaves, so we know what's going to happen in the next episode, but we just
Yeah.
want to see how.
Yeah. And the interesting thing I thought was that George is gone. And then we cut to John and Paul talking.
That's right.
And John says, okay, so if George is gone, should we get Eric in?
Right.
I thought, whoa,
That's a
that
famous
that
line.
is like a family fight, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was like his first instinct. But the thing that I think was the beginning of the second one, you say George is gone. They tried to have some morning meetings. And then the most amazing moment captured on film is when John doesn't turn in that morning. They're sitting in the little group, and Paul says, and then there were two,
Right.
and they close in, and you can see his eyes are welling up,
Right.
and he's thinking, "This is it." And that was an absolutely amazing dramatic moment, which they captured. And you think, even though we know what happened afterwards, because we're watching it almost in real time,
Right.
you're saying at that moment, Paul's thinking, "This is the end." And I think more than any of the others, he's the guy since Brian died who's been trying to keep the Beatles together.
Mm.
He's tried harder than the others. He's been the driving force behind Magical Mystery Tour. It's his idea to get this going. He's trying to manage, and he even mentions that at one point. He said, I can't be the manager. He said, but I feel I've got to do something. He was trying to keep them together, and at that moment, I think he felt, well, George is gone. Well, if John's gone, that's it. This is actually over. And the look on his face, I don't think I'll ever forget. That was an absolute shock when you saw that, the emotion.
Yeah, I get the Paul. I have just a different viewpoint of Paul. I almost get a Brian Wilson type quality of Paul. I just think that he wakes up in the morning, dreams
Yeah,
about making music with John Lennon. And he's
yeah,
there early at the studio and he's, banging out Martha My Dear on piano and making these wonderful musical classics. And yeah, then, and of course, Ringo, this wonderfully gentlemanly kind man who everyone likes is
yeah,
there. And yeah, and Paul has the one scene of, and then there must just be two. And then um Was that, and then John eventually comes. I mean, John always kind of comes in late,
Yeah,
and just that's just the way he is. And we were always told that John was like this curmudgeon. John was quite silly at points. It was
yeah,
great.
yeah, exactly. And I think because we've been told for so many years that the reason this hadn't been released was that it was the breakup of the Beatles. Nobody wanted
Right.
all this negativity. You could the fun they were having, and I loved it. Particularly when sort of early on, we've got to come up with these 14 songs. How many have we got? We can maybe get to 8, and say, well, let's go back to some of the first songs we ever wrote. And it's brilliant. So these are
Right.
titles we've read about somewhere and never heard, and they start playing and singing some of the very very first songs they ever
Right.
wrote. And I noticed with my my country of Liverpool head on and the country roots of the Beatles, the first 3 songs that they were writing and they then performed are all country songs.
Really.
Yeah, and plus they do they sing along to Midnight Special. So you can see that those early country
Hmm.
roots where they were coming out of skiffle and they were starting to develop their songwriting. They were country songs and they were performing them. You could see the fun that they were transported back to when they were teenagers. And I think they recaptured some of that. And their only problem was they were stuck in this huge studio. And they did almost what they do in Abbey Road studio. When they're in Studio 2, which I've been in a couple of times now, it's a big, big studio.
Is it?
They would set themselves up in a little corner.
Huh.
And that's almost what they do here with Twickenham. It's a massive film studio. Get themselves to the back and create a small space. Because
Interesting.
it's not ideal for rehearsing. The acoustics are terrible.
Right.
It's a big cavernous place. But then, of course, they're trying to cope with, it's not just the 4 of them. It's all these microphones being placed around, trying to pick up everything they're saying. And there's what, a dozen people with all the film crew.
Mm.
Michael Lindsay hogging this unbelievably large cigar of his. Um, and he looks like a schoolboy who's nicked behind the bike sheds for his first cigar.
What a character. What a
Yeah.
character.
And he's so posh.
He is.
And, but, he's right in the mix of it. But it was interesting to see how involved he was in everything they were doing.
Now, somebody said Orson Welles was his grandfather. Did you hear this?
As his grandfather, that wouldn't
Yes.
surprise me at all.
If you kind of look at the face, there's similar features there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could see that completely.
And
Definitely.
we have to bring up Yoko. We were also told that Yoko did the. I mean, I remember one particular, just the sweetest woman. She's just sitting there. I remember one scene. John was, he was just getting a little kind of perturbed, just a little bit of frustration on what he was playing. I don't remember, but Yoko, you saw her like put her hand on his back, and John
Yeah.
looked over and just calmed down.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
She wasn't
wonderful.
divisive.
No, at all, at
No.
all.
And again, these are the myths. Yoko broke up the Beatles. No, of course she didn't.
Yes,
At different times, Linda was popping in. When
that's
they got
right.
back to,
With
to
the
Savile Row
kids.
studio,
Yes,
then Heather was in there.
that's
She
right.
got
The
the
daughter
kids running
Heather.
around and,
Yes,
and messing. And that's the funniest bit for me was, when Yoko's doing her screaming thing,
yeah, yeah.
John's on his guitar, she's doing the screeching thing. And Paul's joining in on the drums, and there's
Right.
chaos. And then we cut to little Heather, does the same thing. I thought, that's it, it's child's play. It's fantastic.
It is their family there. Yeah. And then, of course, episode 2, we get introduced to what some call the fifth Beatle, Billy Preston. And it
Yeah,
just seems like a natural fit. He's got that big smile. He's on that, I think it's a Hammond organ. And
yeah.
John's like, "You're now the fifth Beatle." That's it. It was great.
And I think that you notice when he gets in there, the smile out of all 4 of them.
Oh, yeah.
They think, wow, we love this guy. He's
Right.
popped in to see them. He's in London for a couple of days.
That's right.
Are you going to join in? Yeah, whatever. I mean, he's so cool. But you can just tell once he's added in, there's that extra dynamic of the keyboards. And he's got no written music in front of him.
Right. Right.
he puts his head down,
That's right.
his hands are up, and
Yeah.
he's in the moment, and you can just see there's that respect. They all look over and go, "This is so good.
Wow. Yes.
We should have done this a long time ago." Which actually takes me back to one of the early Hamburg stories in April '62 when they went over there to open the Star Club. They were playing on stage with a pianist called Roy Young. Now he'd set up, he was like the artist manager and booking agent for the Star Club. And he played on stage. Now he was like Britain's equivalent to Little Richard.
Hmm.
He was a white guy with the most amazing voice and could play all the boogie woogie piano stuff. Fabulous. I got to know him, lovely fella, really nice fella. They got on so well. Brian said to him, and I think it was in the May of '62, why don't you come back to Liverpool with us and join the Beatles? And he turned him down.
Hmm.
I remember him saying to me, and I know he's repeated it a number of times. Sadly, he's died now. But he said, that's why every night I bang my head against the wall.
A
Oh,
little miscalculation. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, he went on to have an amazing career as a professional keyboardist, playing with people like David Bowie, etc. So, it's not like he missed out. He had a fantastic career. But that was always one element that they were missing because, as we know, Paul's a great pianist, but he can't play piano and bass.
Right.
John can play piano, and he wrote some fantastic stuff on piano. And we even saw George and Ringo
That's right.
playing piano. Ringo with his Octopus's
Don't
Garden.
pass me by.
That's as far as I've got.
It was Octopus's by. Yeah, not don't pass me by. Octopus's. Yeah.
That's as far as it. But it's
Just
funny,
the
but
chorus.
yeah, but just that dynamic of having Billy Preston in there, and he is just wonderful sounds that he was creating, and it just lifted them all.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was the two things. One, they were in their own little place in Savile Row. They created their own little studio. They were happy there. And then Billy Preston comes in, and you had that, and you hear the discussion.
Yes.
What do? We don't just want to pay him. Shall we ask him to join him? He could become the fifth Beatle. And they were serious about it.
Yes.
Isn't he the only one non-Fab Four who's got a credit on a Beatles song?
Because they never give Clapton credit for White Album, right? For My Guitar Gently Weeps.
No. But I'm pretty sure Billy Preston gets his credit.
Oh, wow.
What a guy.
Yeah.
Now, this is something I didn't know until just before the series. Somebody'd obviously seen a preview of it. And Billy Preston, we just know as a keyboardist. But he used to do this amazing show. And you can find it on YouTube, I think it is. Ray Charles at the piano. Billy Preston would sing. And he dances like James Brown.
Huh.
Oh, you've got to see it. It's amazing. I saw this like in the week before it.
Is that right? He had a couple of big hits in the '70s. Will It Go Round in Circles? I forgot. And yeah, he had two really big songs. And I thought at one point they said they actually met Preston in Hamburg at one point.
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was over there playing with Little Richard. And I think Billy was only about 16 at the time. So that's how they knew him. They met him out there. And of course, he was with Little Richard, who was their hero.
Of course. Yeah.
And they got to know him out there. So that's why, obviously they kept in touch to some degree. So he was just over in London doing something. He pops in to see them.
Incredible.
And it lifted the other four completely. You see the smiles on their faces. I said, oh, this is just so good.
It really. And we get to see that big anvil, that Mal, they're one of their hits for Maxwell Silver Hammer. And by the way, he's documenting everything. He's writing down lyrics. I mean, it seems like with cables everywhere and kind of, sometimes they're goofing off, but it's quite structured and who does what. Everybody's tuning the instruments. He had the piano tuner at one point. At one point, they're like, Paul, your bass is not tuned, and he hands it off to somebody else. And just the way it's done. And another great thing on the second episode is that we see that footage that Paul took in India.
Yeah.
And we see like the Beach Boys there. And we see like Woody Allen's wife. I forgot her name all of a sudden.
Mia Farrow.
Mia Farrow. We see all these people and like
Yeah,
John there and Yoko. And so we get to see that video that Paul took inside this documentary. It was
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. And again, it just shows how talented and creative,
Yeah.
that these guys were. You know, none of them were satisfied with, okay, I've learned to do this instrument. I will play this for my career. They're all off doing something different. At different times, all four of them are playing drums. All
Yeah.
four of them are playing piano. Um, you know, George is playing bass at some point. And I think one of the wonderful things, and you wonder why it took so long, is for two of us, because from early on in Twickenham right through, they're struggling. The song is fantastic. It's one of my
Wonderful.
favorites. I
Yes.
love the song, but they couldn't get the sound right. And then suddenly they're saying, why don't we try it with acoustics and no bass? We've done it before. We don't need the bass. George is sort of picking bass notes on his electric guitar.
Right.
Paul and John get their acoustics out, and you hear it straight away and go, that's the
Magic.
sound.
Magic.
And
Yeah.
and they knew. And that's the perfectionists in them. I mean, every time they're saying, is that the best one? Should we do it again? They weren't just going to sit back and say, oh, that
That's
take
right.
will do. Couldn't be bothered. No, they did take after take. And
Oh yeah.
I think that the thing I learned the most from this is finally what the Lennon-McCartney songwriting process was all about.
Mm. Just iteration,
Because,
right?
yeah, 'cause we sort of got this idea of, well, if it's a Paul song, he would normally have like 75-80% of the song. He'd bring it to John.
Mm.
They talk it through. John would contribute a bit, and then that would be the song. But now it's so much more than that. So the one we see from the very beginning all the way through is Get Back. When Paul's just sat there and he's slapping on his bass, playing with
Yeah.
this melody, and then he's suddenly hearing it. There it is. And he's just humming and throwing some words in. And you see Get Back starting. But then all the way through, it's like those conversations. And it could be just him and John.
Yeah.
George Ringo could be involved. And they're scribbling about with lyrics, with which chord they could do that, progression, we could do this. And you suddenly realize, yeah, so it can be Paul's song as the main writer,
Right.
but you can see John's input into it, and then
Yeah.
the others. So all four of them are contributing
Yes.
to the song, and that for me was the biggest thing I took away from this. Is now I fully understand now, or as best as we can, how they start with a song and how it evolves, and there's the finished product, and that for me was worth every minute of watching it.
Yeah.
Just for that. And yet there was so much more.
And Get Back was like originally like an immigration song. It was like Get Back to Pakistan, and we're sitting there as a home viewer thinking, oh, Paul, oh, you almost got it. Keep going. We're like helping them write the lyrics. No, that's not
Yeah,
it. No, and it was just absolutely wonderful. And my mother, who is who I listened to her vinyl albums as a child. That's who she had all
yeah,
the Beatles albums. She was the one, and she watched this, and she said her biggest takeaway was I didn't realize how complicated it was to make music. Just the
exactly.
iterative process of just no,
Yeah,
no, 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 keep trying, and then
yeah.
there you are. It and the way they just kind of kept coming together, and oh my
Come together.
goodness.
Very good. That's a good
Very
one.
good. So at the end of two, they finally decide, and they threw by the way, they threw a cruise ship out at one point to play.
Yeah.
And George, another thing about George, we're not mentioning George much. I mean, he was very grounded, George.
Yes.
George, like, look, we can't go on a cruise ship. What are we going to bring all the fans there and hang out with them? And
Yeah.
that's just not logistical. And you found George kind of being kind of the realistic person. Is like, come on, let's rethink this. And they're
He's the
throwing all these
pragmatist.
ideas that he's very
Yeah.
pragmatic. Yeah, very good
Yeah.
way to put it. He's very pragmatic. And then of course Ringo is just, back there, and he's listening to what's happening. His ears are always there, and he's just adding his wonderful percussion and drums. So at the end of
Yeah.
second episode, they finally decide they're going to do it on the rooftop, and we all know what happens on the rooftop. But still, just like at the end of one, we can't wait to see how it
Yeah,
unfolds.
it's the cliffhanger again. And
Yeah,
one thing I never realized was that even till the day before they're doing it, there was still a question mark whether they were going to perform.
right.
Which I thought that had been sorted earlier. And so there's so many things that were cropping up. And one thing that's like almost like a repeating process all the time, they were nervous
They were.
because they hadn't performed a concert for fans since Candlestick Park, 29th
San
August
Francisco.
66.
Yes.
All they'd done is that Hey Jude video, and they'd enjoyed that process, but they were nervous. And they were thinking, can we do this?
Mm.
Are we good enough? Do we know these songs well enough to be able to just perform them? And that for me, I'd have thought by that point they were so confident in their own
Right.
ability. But and that's the sign I think of always of good musicians. You know, you always hear them say, if you're not nervous when you're going on the stage, then there's something wrong.
Mm. And they
Um,
did that with the Rolling Stones. That circus thing, was it just a
Rock and Roll
couple of them?
Circus.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was at least John. I don't know.
Yeah, John did that with them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was very interesting how they were actually nervous about
Yeah.
that. And then, they're pressure to get these songs done. And yeah, and then episode 3 is where we see Harrison and Starkey working on Octopus's Garden. We just see the two of them,
I
and
know,
it
that was brilliant.
was wonderful.
Yeah. George is right there to give some
Yes,
advice.
that's right. How about this? How about this? And yeah, yeah, it was very interesting. And
Yeah.
oh my goodness. And then
There was so much.
there was so much. And that, yeah, with that 3, that this is going to be the end. So it's like, oh, you're almost like, oh no, what's going to happen here? And then everything kind of builds up, and this is where we see Heather, right? Paul, well,
Yeah.
no, it's just Linda's daughter. It's not Paul's
It's
daughter,
Linda's
correct?
daughter. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And she is just so playful and so cute in the studio. And I remember the one particular scene where they're doing Old Brown Shoe, and
Yeah.
George is asking Billy Preston about piano chords. And it was a
Yes.
great interaction between those two. We
Yeah.
see these legends.
Yeah. And that's musos. That's what musicians are like when they get together. That I was doing that with some friends. We'd do a Christmas sing along thing, just all the famous Christmas songs, and we were going through all the well known ones and stuff. And as well, I don't know if you know, "Driving Home for Christmas" by Chris Rea.
I don't
Like,
think so.
it was a massive hit over here. Great song, but the chords are really jazzy,
Hmm.
and it's an A add 9 and a B minor add 9, and none of us could read music. And we said, "What the hell is that?"
8 and 9.
And you have to look it up, and so
Yeah.
you learn. You know, if somebody's not sure something, then you ask another one.
Right.
Thankfully, one of the guys we're doing it with is a music teacher, so more often than not, we defer to him. But it's that thing of, there's no egos in there. You want to learn, like, something I don't know, teach me that. And it's almost like one of those early stories Paul talks about when they're the quarrymen. He says, and you know your 3 chords, and somebody says, I know B7. You've got to go on a bus, and you get on the bus, you travel to the other end of Liverpool, and you learn B7. Because that's how you learn. 'Cause none of the Beatles could read music, so that's how you pick these things up. And yeah, there's all those interactions which you never really have ever got to see. And yeah, it was wonderful to watch, and particularly when we were sort of, well, I know that the trailer came out, and both Paul and Ringo said, "Look, this was so enjoyable."
Mm.
Now we realise we actually did have a good time.
Right.
Um, so that was good, but it was so much more positive and enjoyable,
It really
than I
was.
thought it was going to be. And Peter Jackson's done an amazing job.
Amazing job. Yeah.
Sacked the intern who did the opening, but for the
you mentioned that. So they finally decide they're going to go up there and they're like testing it out
Yeah,
and they're like jumping on different areas and they're,
yeah,
they finally get everything up and they're performing. And what surprised me up there is that they end up doing the same. Well, I only did like 3 or 4 songs, just a couple of times each, correct?
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know
They
they
thought that,
repeated songs.
yeah, so these are the ones that are ready to go.
Ah,
Um, and again, that's another plus from this is we always talk about, Paul, great musician. He can play just about anything, and we appreciate that. George, fantastic guitarist, what he contributes. Ringo, one of the greatest drummers there's ever been.
sure.
Nobody ever really talks about John as a rhythm guitarist.
Mm,
And when you see, the intro he's got for Dig a Pony,
right.
which is quite intricate,
Yes,
and he nails every single time he
he
does it.
does.
And I don't think we talk enough about John's contribution musically as a
Mm,
rhythm guitarist. And you can go through how the hell he plays All My Loving, at that speed. There's so much that John does in that role, which is almost like in the old days, it was always be, it's the bass guitarist, we don't talk about him.
right.
It's always, we never really talk about John as the rhythm guitarist for what he contributes, but a lot of the time he's the one who's driving the song. And
Sure is.
when you see him doing that opening to Dig a Pony, and he gets it absolutely right every single time, you
Every
thought
time.
these guys were really on top of their game.
And even when he plays like I Me My, when he's playing that side, what is that
Oh,
side?
the slide, yeah.
The slide. I mean, I don't know if he's ever played that before, but he's doing it perfectly. I
Yeah.
mean, no, Blue for You. No, what's it? Is it I Me My? No, what is that song? It's a George song that he
Oh,
takes that out
it's For You Blue.
for you, Blue. Yes, yeah, and well, another great song, by the way. And by the way, while they're up on the rooftop, we're assuming it's real time. We get to see the police, and the crowd gathering, and some of the crowd saying, "Well, I don't know them." The others saying, "We do know them." And of course, this is the first time they've heard these songs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you have some youth, and you have older gentlemen there, our age, saying, "Oh, I really like the Beatles. This
Who
is
are you
great."
calling old? Whoa.
Older, let's say mature. Let's say mature.
I love that one.
But
But
then
that's
we have the police
did
coming
nothing.
into the office and they're like, oh, they're waiting patiently and they want to talk to the people. And it's great.
Those police, I mean, that hidden camera was genius.
Oh, that's right. The hidden
And
camera.
I mean, that was great. But so you're watching these young policemen, and over here we call them a job's worth.
That's,
Well, I don't know what you call them, but you say, I'd like to let you do it, but it's more than a job's worth.
I
So
see.
we call them a job's worth, and that's what
Hmm.
they were like. No, we've been sent down here. We've had 30
Right.
complaints at the police station.
That's
No,
right.
no, no.
30.
She goes over and over and over. I mean,
Yeah.
the police station is literally a few blocks down
Is it?
on Savile Row, so it was really close to where they were. It was just around the corner. Um, and they're just trying to be officious and
Right.
look at me, I'm important. And then the difference later on when the senior policeman comes in,
That's
hey
right.
guys, how we doing? Yeah, don't worry, this is fine. But what's the way to the top? Great, I'll nip up there. That's how it should be handled.
Right.
Um, the difference, and then because when those two young coppers get up there, they're on the roof, and I think all the Beatles turn and look at them and think, "Oh, this is so good." What are they going to do? Take the guitars off us? They can't do anything. Just it's the schoolboy, and I think that's the bit we saw
Mm.
so many times from all four of them. It was that mischievous teenage schoolboy humor,
Mm.
and they would have thought, "Oh, this is great. We're getting away with this. They're not going to stop us." Ha ha ha!
That's right.
Let's do another take of Get Back.
And at one point, at the end, they kind of go down and they're in the main kind of control room, and they're almost worried that they might be arrested, which was odd, right? Were you think they were concerned at all?
Well, I think they'd be worried because there'd been the incidents
Uh,
with the dodgy police, and obviously with all the chaos that brought with John taking the rap for the cannabis, and
right. Right.
the dodgy policeman who later was found to be well and truly dodgy, and he'd done the
Interesting.
Rolling Stones, but for possession and all that kind of stuff. Um, so then they would have got a little bit more nervous, but in the end, there's that well-known phrase, which is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
That's what they were doing. Yeah. So if we just talk about the chronology here, the time frame. So this is January of 69, 2
Yep,
months before they released the White Album in November
yep.
68. So
End of
that's already
'68.
been
Yeah,
released. So that
yeah,
so that double set, all those songs back in the USSR, all those songs, Guitar Gently Weeps, are already released. Great music. January they're doing this, but they don't release Abbey Road until September. So they
yeah.
take 8 months after that to make that album.
Well, yeah, because the problem they then have with all the songs they've recorded, they can't decide what they're doing with them. Then
Mm,
Glen Johns does his bit.
right. Yeah.
George Martin's sort of been involved, then George Martin's out of the picture. And again, that little thing, which I thought Peter Jackson did really, really well. Every now and again, there's just a little, oh, John, you're meeting with Alan Klein.
That's
And his
right.
name is just planted just, 3 or 4 times. And you get that little bit of off camera where he's talking to George and Ringo. Alan Klein's this great guy. He's done so much for the Stones.
Oh my
There's
goodness.
something nice about that, isn't there?
It is. It is. It's harmonious. So, back from a technical little break. So, Glen Johns is he officially the producer, and George Martin no longer is?
Well, that's what they end up doing. Because
I didn't
Glenn's
realize
the one
that.
who's involved. Because don't get George Martin was never sort of on the engineer side of production.
Mm,
Twiddling the knobs and all that kind of stuff. He never got involved in that. He was in the studio with the boys. He was talking to them. Whereas Glenn was a bit of both.
mm,
So really, he's given the task of with the songs they've produced so far. I think he mixed the single for Get Back, and then he produces the rest of them and says, "Here you go. Here's my mixes," and the boys don't like it, and they then reject it. So the album, I think they were going to use "Get Back" as the title of the album. So he's done his mixes, give it to the Beatles, and they don't like them. They reject them, and they just then, while they're trying to sort out what's happened with the movie and all that kind of stuff, they then start looking ahead to work on Abbey Road. So they then go and record Abbey Road. So that's the last one they actually recorded together.
right.
Then you get to the end of '69, and that's when John declares he's leaving the Beatles. You've had all the Alan Klein stuff going on. There's so much acrimony by this point. By the end of '69, that particularly John and Paul just aren't really communicating at all.
Hmm.
Um, so then I think by then they've got Abbey Road sorted. They then get the last couple of the songs, which I think I Me Mine's one of them, that were for the Get Back, Let It Be album. They get those recorded. And this time, George Martin's involved.
Hmm.
So he's still like an overall producer. Klein's in the mix. Abbey Road's been done. John and Paul aren't talking. It all gets very confusing. So then when the Let It Be project sort of resurrected, John then thinks it's a good idea to give the mixes that Glen Johns had done and give those to Phil Spector. So this is where Phil Spector comes into it,
I didn't realize that.
and this is where it becomes even more divisive because, as we know, he throws his wall of sound and everything. Hence the reason we got Let It Be Naked all those years ago,
Hmm.
and he just threw all this stuff on. And I think by that point, none of them really cared about the project. It had been so long ago. And even though there had been a sort of fallout, for me, Abbey Road is my favourite album.
Hmm.
I think it's a wonderful album. You've got John, Paul, and George. Their songwriting is on a par with each other. Now George is up there with the other two. There's
Absolutely.
some fantastic songs on
At
there.
that point, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the last album they put together. It's the last one they record together. Let It Be just become a bit of a millstone around the neck,
Mm.
and just get tossed around. And in the end, thought, what the hell? We don't care. Give it to Phil Spector and then just release it. And by the time it comes out, it's like about a month or so after they've officially split up, and none of them were interested. And then you've got McCartney wanting to launch his new album. Like John's doing his Plastic Ono stuff. Ringo's already planning with his sentimental journey.
Yeah, so I have the chronology here. So
Yeah,
so Abbey Road comes out September. I don't know if this is correct. I forgot where I got it. And then September of '69, Abbey Road comes out, and then in
yeah,
'70, March, Ringo Starr comes out with Sentimental Journey in March.
yeah,
April, McCartney comes out, with the cherries on the McCartney
yeah,
album, wonderful album, and
yeah.
then Let It Be doesn't come out until May. So
That's right, Mike.
we go March, April, May. We go Ringo Starr, McCartney, and then Let It Be, and then Ringo Starr releases another album, the Boku Blues, there in
Oh,
September.
which is
Harrison
fantastic album.
Harrison, All Things Must Pass comes out in November, and Plastic Ono comes out in December.
There you go.
1970 might be the greatest release, I don't know, of the Beatles music.
Yeah, and sandwiched in there in the April is when they officially split up.
And they split sometime, yeah, in
Yeah,
the second quarter. So odd.
it is. Now there's you just reminded me of another thing that cropped up. I think it was in the third episode. Is when George is talking about his songs, he's saying, I've got all these songs.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
said,
yeah.
maybe what we should do is, we'll go off do our own projects, then we come back together
Right.
and we do a Beatles album.
That was great.
Now, for how many years have we all been saying that? And so many people have had a go at
All right.
putting together a new Beatles album. That George was actually suggesting that then. That I think that could have happened if they didn't have all the acrimony over Alan Klein, all that kind of stuff going on. But it was interesting that was actually a suggestion.
And it was a great idea because we learned during the White Album, which was 2 months before, before we have Get Back, the documentary, that he recorded All Things Must Pass, and a lot of
Yeah,
those songs that he put on that soul album were recorded during those White Album sessions.
yeah,
It's just incredible music there. Oh my goodness! Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they were producing
Explain
so
what happened
much.
with. It's amazing how much music was out in 1970. I mean,
Yeah.
it's absolutely amazing. So, talk briefly about what happened with Klein and why was that so instrumental there? Like, what was the issue?
The problem was that Apple had been set up with good intentions.
Now, Klein is the CEO of Apple, correct?
Well, eventually he is. The
Eventually.
problem is him coming in. So before that, he was known for coming in and sorting out the Rolling Stones.
Mm.
Their finances were in an absolute mess. He straightens them out, and that's how he wins John over. Now, Apple, by then, it had been a great idea when they set it up, but it was just running out of control.
Mm.
So the money was just hemorrhaging out of the place. They were going to be bankrupt. Something needed doing. Somebody needed to come in with a good business brain, and this is where I think they really miss Brian. This is what he was particularly good at with his brother Clive. The two of them together,
Mhm.
they would have sorted it. So something needs sorting out. They need to fix Apple. It's in an absolute mess. Now Klein comes in. Now he doesn't have the greatest reputation already, but as we saw in Get Back, John was already having meetings with him, and he's had his head turned, and he's trying to convince the others. Now Paul, of course, he's with Linda. Linda's father and brother are very well established lawyers, attorneys over in New York, particularly dealing in the entertainment industry.
Mm.
They would have been perfect. So Paul wants Linda's dad to come in and be the guy to take it on. The other three want Alan Klein. That's like the final nail in the coffin for the Beatles. It's a 3-1, which cannot be resolved.
Right.
And Paul's then thinking, okay, if I'm outnumbered here, I don't trust Klein. And his instincts were right. I don't trust him. We're not going to be able to resolve this together. He realizes then he's got to be apart from the Beatles as well. So that's what leads to the final bit of the breakup, that they cannot agree on how they move forward, who's going to run Apple. And Klein comes in, and he's ruthless. And people like Alistair Taylor. No, Alistair, lovely guy. I met him not long before he died. Lovely man. He was Brian's number 2, right from the very beginning in Liverpool. He was effectively running Apple. And I remember him telling me, he said, I was out at a business lunch. I got a phone call, told to come back. And he said, I knew what was happening. He got back and he was told to clear his desk, and out he went.
Wow.
He tried to contact the 4 Beatles. He said, I wasn't going to be begging for money or to get my job back. I just wanted to warn them that this man is going to wreck everything.
Wow.
Nobody would take his phone call. Now, for a guy being so close to them, that's poor from the 4 Beatles. And virtually everybody was getting kicked out, and Alan Klein asset stripped it. Made himself lots of money, of course. And that's what really was the end of the road for the Beatles. It was that last bit where the drive the wedge right through them. Paul would not side with the other 3 and want to bring Alan Klein in. He was determined that the Eastmans should be in to do it. And Paul was right. They should have done, but they didn't. So it was a 3-1.
Wow.
He knew that was it.
Okay, so here's what I'm excited to talk about, and I emailed you before that. Wanted to talk about 2 things: myths debunked, and then winners and losers. So let's start with myths debunked. What myths that we were told through other documentary, through the press, the one scene where they're reading the paper, and John is saying, George and John get in a fight in a Paris, bar, and John starts acting like he's fighting with George, and it's great.
It's brilliant. It's the fact they're reading about themselves, and you always wonder, how did they react to it? Right. And there you're seeing them, and they just think it's hysterical. We weren't even there. They're just making stuff up. But they could laugh about it by then, which was healthy. That was really good to see. Right. I thought that was really good. There's another little aside, just a little comment, which I found very interesting, was with John, and somebody had said to him about having a drink of wine. And he said, remember Bob Wooler? And that was it, and then moved on. Now, a lot of people that won't mean anything to them. Paul McCartney's 21st birthday party in Liverpool, June 1963. John had just been on a holiday with Brian to Spain, and he came back. Now, Bob Wooler was the cavern DJ, and he was like a mentor to all the Merseybeat bands. Brilliant guy, really, really funny, and he had just had these one-liners, which was superb. And he thought he could have a joke with John in reference to the holiday. He said, "Hey John, how was the honeymoon?" Now, normally you'd have got away with that, but John was a terrible drunk. He was not good, and he was really badly drunk. He'd already punched Billy J. Kramer's girlfriend, and when Bob Wooler said this, John attacked Bob so violently he put Bob in hospital.
Because there was rumors that Epstein and John were romantically connected.
Yeah, I mean it was a throwaway comment from Bob, not suggesting anything more. Right. Obviously knowing that Brian was gay, and the fact that John and Brian had gone off on holiday together.
Sure.
So just for, as Bob did, it was a throwaway line. but John battered him. Now, luckily for them, I mean, this is June '63. They've got a #1 album, UK tour. It made the inside small column of one of the tabloid papers. Now, if that was today, that would have been front page news. Right. It would have been absolutely everywhere, and their career would have been ruined. John apologised to Bob eventually. I mean, I think he broke some ribs. I mean, he really beat him up badly. Wow. Had to be dragged off him. But it was just interesting that just in that one comment about having a drink, and John references, remember Bob Wooler.
So Paul says this to John?
No. I can't remember who it is. It's one of the other guys in the studio.
Mention it to John.
Mentioned it to John.
I see.
But about having a drink, and he says, "Remember Bob Wooler?" Wow. I thought, wow, yeah. So we're like 6 years later. Wow. That's still in there in his head. Insight. Yeah. So it's, again, that was just one of those little things that I picked up. But I think, as you were saying, on the myths, right? First of all, we were told "Let It Be" was depressing. Right. Well, it wasn't.
Certainly not.
I enjoyed that. I think a lot of credit has to go to Michael Lindsay Hogg for having all of these hours and hours. I would say it was 60 hours of film, 150 hours of audio. Yeah. For having the mindset to set about and do this. He's all this amazing stuff he could give to Peter Jackson. So I think the first myth that got debunked was we'd just be watching infighting and the Beatles splitting up. And we weren't at all. I think it's as you said right at the very beginning. These were 4 guys who obviously loved each other.
Yes.
And were having so much fun.
Right.
So that for me was like one of the biggest myths, was that we were going to see something which we should never have released this. It was brilliant. So,
I can remember apprehension about actually watching. I said, "Oh no, are we going to see them being dismantled and fall apart? Is this going to be?" And it just couldn't be more opposite. Those men, and we learned that after your montage, of course, but we learned that in the first 5 or 10 minutes of them interacting. Yeah. Like, look at them; they're smiling. They're not looking the other way and talking out of the corner of their mouth or anything. They giggling and they loved each other.
And how many times did they go back and then just fall into a song they used to do?
That's right.
A number of times they reference Hamburg, and then one of the old rock and roll standards comes out. Or they do one of the other songs and they put Silly Voices on. Right. And they'd grown up with the radio show, The Goons. And The Goons really influenced them a hell of a lot. And they did for all of that generation. And some of the later generations that I've listened to, them are absolutely fabulous. And that was all about different characters with silly voices. And that's what they were doing. And you could see that in them. They could just go, right, I'm going to do this song. And they'd all just join in.
That's right.
And you could see the fun was still there.
Yeah.
And that was a jam session. Brilliant.
What was the one scene? I think they were doing The Two of Us where John and Paul were like not moving their lips. They were like kind of like talking like this. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it kept going. I thought maybe a verse or two, but I think the whole song they weren't moving their lips. It was unbelievable. Yeah. It was so great.
And that is the Goonish humor. Right. That's what it was like. And that was one of those lovely little coincidences that when they first went down and met George Martin and they realized who he was. Well, he had produced albums with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, who are the 2 main guys in the Goons. And of course, Peter Sellers turns up, doesn't he?
We need to talk about that. One of the greatest comedic actors of all times, like kind of shows up and it's a little awkward. He doesn't say much. Yeah. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, that's Peter Sellers. What's going on? This was back in the first, in the twin, the big studio.
They're still in Twickenham, weren't they?
In Twickenham, yeah. And so he was in the show that they loved.
Oh, yeah. He was one of the main characters. But it's one of those things you often see with comedians, particularly if they do a lot of impersonations, or different characters, and they can slip into them But when it's just them on their own being themselves, they're often quite shy and introverted,
Right.
and something quite sad. Off, when they're off stage or off screen, whichever it is, when they become a character, their whole body becomes that character. And Peter Sellers was lost in between his normal self and occasionally just dipping into a little bit of the mad stuff. Because of course his famous bit was when he did A Hard Day's Night, as Henry V. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, I don't think I have.
It's fantastic. He did it for television. So he's dressed up like the Shakespearean
Yes.
character, Henry V. Going, it's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. And you'll be able to see it on YouTube. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. So George Martin had worked with these guys, and Paul has said in a later interview, he had the record of Peter Sellers doing all this comedy stuff, which George Martin had produced. They knew who George Martin was.
George Martin produced that stuff. Wow.
Yeah. And that's why George Martin was trying to get away from just doing the comedy records. But they knew George Martin had worked with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan, who are the two main guys from the Goon Show. That was the show that all the lads of that age, they all listened to that. And what you do is you'd listen to it at night, go into school the next day, and you do all the funny voices, and you'd recreate it all. So George Martin was already a bit of a legend to them because he'd done these comedy albums.
Interesting.
And one of the things that George Martin said on that first meeting at that audition they did in the June of '62 was, he said the music was average.
Right.
When they got to the control room, he said, I gave them a talk for about 20 minutes. They didn't say a word. And then said, anything that any of you would like to say? Deathly silence. And that's when George Harrison says, yeah, I don't like your tie. And just for a moment, George Martin was trying to think, hey? They're being funny. So from that point on, John, Paul, and George just became the Goons.
I see.
And did their own Liverpool version of the Goon Show. That's what George Martin saw in the characters of those three.
Interesting.
Was that they had this mini Goon Show. So it's all those other little connections. So Peter Sellers wondering, because of course he's doing the Magic Christian with Ringo, because that's what they were getting kicked out of Twickenham Studios for. So that's why they had this gap, but it was only for a matter of a couple of weeks, because then the studio was getting taken over for doing the Magic Christian. So that's when they end up at Savile Row for their own little studio.
Now, I remember when Ringo Starr did Caveman. He had no lines in it. I think I want to say it came out in 1980. That's where he met his wife, I believe.
Barbara Bach.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So other myths debunked. Yoko Ono. I mean, unbelievable what we're told about her. And it just couldn't be wrong. More wrong.
It's the whole idea of, the four Beatles were in the studio and then Yoko's there, as if there was only just the five of them there.
Right.
As we saw, there's
Hal's taking notes. There's engineers all over the place. There's
people coming and going all the time. People dropping in. They have the families dropping in, girlfriends, wives, everybody's. So in that, you didn't see Yoko being pushy, dragging John away from anything. And again, I think that's one of those positives. And it takes me back to the very first article I ever wrote about the Beatles. Was for the London Beatles fan club. And it was the story of Yoko giving money to Dovedale School, where John and George had attended, where my three daughters were at the time. And Yoko had donated all this money to the school in John's memory. Been over to the school a few times since then. I met her in Mendips in John's childhood home. Lovely. She was wonderful with the children as well from the school. So the first thing I ever wrote was a positive story about Yoko,
Wow.
giving the money to the school and what she's done for Liverpool. And it was nice to see how she then comes across in Get Back as pretty quiet, doesn't impose herself. She's not trying to take over or do anything at all. And again, you spotted that really well. With John was getting a little bit
Right.
uppity, and she's the calming influence. Um,
And at one point, they're celebrating because they announced that her divorce is official.
yeah,
And
yeah,
by the way, we talk about other people like engineers. At one point, they look at an engineer and they put underneath Alan Parsons, tape operator. This
yeah,
is Alan Parsons from the Alan Parsons Project. This
yeah.
is, I mean, he went on to have an incredible career. Who's just kind of being a tape operator there during Get Back. I mean, this is incredible, the talent that was there.
Amazing. He's starting off doing that. As you say, becomes a producer. I've still got a couple of his albums for those Alan Parsons projects I discovered
Yeah.
in the 80s.
Yes.
Wonderful. No,
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant.
Eye in the
Such a talented
sky.
man.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things that all the way through the Beatles' career, we talk about George Martin and his importance, which cannot be
Mm.
cannot be missed. But there are all these different engineers who were part of the story, and they were the ones coming up with ideas, inventing new techniques, things that needed doing. They think, oh, right, okay, well, if we take that and that, we could do that. These guys contributed so much and definitely deserve their credit. Now, Jeff Emmerich's around, they'd had Ken Townsend, Norman Smith. These guys were very much part, because as I was saying before, George Martin, he wasn't a sound desk guy. He didn't do that. He wasn't the technical. He could hear like the finished process. He could oversee everything that was going on. He could have those discussions, with particularly with John and Paul, but with all four of them in the room. But these engineers, tape operators, everything, they did so much, with limited resources.
Right.
That's the funny bit at Twickenham.
4 tracks.
George Harrison lends his
That's
8-track
right.
recorder from his
Right.
studio at home to them because they only had 4-track.
They only had 4.
What?
I remember that. Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
And other
Uh,
myths debunked, I think we can go through each one of the Beatles. I mean, Paul, I like I mentioned before, like a Brian Wilson, I just get this
yeah,
kind of quiet genius that he wakes up thinking about it. He comes in the morning. Hey, I came up with this last night. Let it be. And John is not the curmudgeon. I just always thought he was.
hmm?
Hey, everybody, get in line. We're making this song, and I mean, he was quite silly and goofy, still a genius, very much so.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And George, very pragmatic, very still asking a lot of questions. Ringo, the kind of glue that held everybody
Yeah,
together.
yeah. He's just always there, and I think we saw. Again, it's what we were saying before. You think, are we watching the end of the Beatles? But at that point, we weren't.
Right.
No, they had the row, they had their argument. It gets resolved, and then George is back in, smiling, happy, and they're just getting on with it. And they all seemed to enjoy it. And again, I think that's something that Paul has said in the lead up to the series coming out, was that how he'd remembered it was
Hmm.
a lot more negative.
Interesting.
When he and Ringo had seen what Peter Jackson had done, he said, "I just didn't realize we actually had fun." He said, "And it's been fun watching it again, because it's like we said a few times, they were having fun doing this."
Right, absolutely. There's nothing. They were very genuine. There was nothing
Yeah,
fake about that at all. How would you love to sit next to Paul or Ringo when the first time they watched that? Boy, that would they should have recorded that. That should have been a
yeah,
documentary.
yeah,
uh, yeah. And then we had his
definitely.
daughter. We had Olivia Harrison, right, as one of the producers. Yoko as one of the producers.
Yeah.
Of course, Paul and Ringo. We talk about winners and losers. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the first on my list is Disney themselves. We have to applaud Disney for doing this. I don't know if other studios had money to do this. I'm sure Disney did very well. We don't need to feel sorry for them, but I want to applaud Disney for for
Yeah,
doing this. I don't know who else would have allowed an 8-hour documentary on the Beatles. Maybe more, maybe more. Maybe I just don't know. But Disney did a great job of putting this out and pushing it out at a
they
good
did.
time. Yeah,
Yeah,
releasing it one night.
yeah.
Peter
And
Jackson.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, Thanksgiving, right? Peter Jackson himself. You know, um, he never comes in at the end and says, "Hey, a director's cut maybe is coming out eventually," but he doesn't include that in the documentary, which is great. He doesn't
No.
want talking heads. His opinion is irrelevant. He already gave us his opinion on what he thought we should see.
Yeah, absolutely. And full credit to him. We knew what he can do. Lord of the Rings, that trilogy was incredible.
Right.
And again, with those lovely connections, because in the 60s, with the lads had read The Lord of the Rings, and that is one of those potential films they were thinking of doing,
Mm,
was can we do The Lord of the Rings? They actually considered that back then,
interesting.
which they wouldn't have been able to do.
Right.
You needed the technology,
Right.
which Peter Jackson used, absolutely brilliantly.
Won many Oscars
Um,
for yeah.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the thing, I don't know if you ever saw the World War One
That he did.
film
Yes, I
that
did. It
did.
was very good.
Oh
Very
my
good. Yeah.
goodness, into color and HD.
Right.
That just gives you a totally different perspective. And I think once we'd seen that, we thought, right, I know technically what he can do with it. And it was yeah, it was just absolutely amazing.
And the editing, it was just done so well. Now we can get into the losers a little bit. I don't know. I'll share my opinion. Perhaps the
Yeah,
press, the way the
yeah,
press portrayed these four gentlemen was terrible. I know they're in the business of selling newspapers at the time, but uh, was it? Let me ask you: do you think it was more of an English press? Was it American press? Was it all the press? How do you feel about that?
um, I think the marked change was with the Beatles more popular than Jesus thing,
Mm,
because when that came out over here, nobody batted an eyelid.
right.
No, nobody mentioned it. It's only when he got into, well, even when it went into the American magazine, what was it Dateline?
I think it was.
Um, and it wasn't the lead story. I think Paul's on the cover. Nobody did much, but it was the DJ in the Deep South.
Right.
Thought, let's have some fun with it. Let's whip people up into a frenzy. So I think by then, the four Beatles were fed up.
Mm,
Um, and I think maybe that this is the change from when they're starting out. Because even when you look back at when they were trying to get some press for Love Me Do, and you read, these guys who went round to every office, and because they were from Liverpool, nobody was particularly interested,
hmm.
and they got fed up. Then, of course, they become megastars, and everybody wants to talk to them. Then they don't want to talk to the press, and it's that general decline in the standards of the press, which continue to decline to this day. And I, just when you think they can't get lower, they manage to surpass themselves and sink
It's
even
true.
deeper.
It is true. It's
So
unfortunate.
I think you see that the disconnect, that the press were bored with the Beatles, and it's a British thing, a very British thing over here is the worst thing you can do as a Brit is to win something,
Mm,
because the British media love an underdog.
hmm.
And we saw it with one of our boxers, Frank Bruno.
I remember Frank
Yeah,
Bruno.
remember
Yeah.
Frank Bruno? Yeah, he
Yeah.
ended up taking on Tyson.
Yeah.
Um, he's just so popular. He got a little bit of success, but not very much. So
Right.
he's absolutely loved. And we do that, and we get a sports person. They achieve something, they get built up, but once they get built up in the press, aren't these wonderful? They go, nah, let's find a way to knock them back down again. And that's why I have not bought a newspaper in probably a good 10 years.
Interesting.
because I've given up on them because they're too cynical and they hate success. And the Beatles have become so successful
Mm,
and they've done so much for Britain, and in a way still are. You know, with the tourism,
right.
you know, they've done so much for Britain, but they just get a bit fed up, and so they look just to knock them down.
I remember
So
I'm also a U2 fan. I remember Bono once describing the difference between, he said in America, when somebody gets to a certain point, everybody says, hey, I want to get to that person. I want to be where that person is. But he says specifically in Ireland, when somebody gets to that point, they say, hey, I'm going to get that guy. I'm going to get him.
that's it.
That's the difference.
That's exactly it. That is a very British thing.
It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. They hate someone when he gets really successful. Then they want to knock him down again.
Right,
I
right.
just don't get the mentality.
And
Don't
then the press
understand it.
specifically when the Beatles are reading, stuff about them there in Get Back, and they're just laughing and mocking it, and that's just the press being what they were. We have similar kind of things now
Oh,
where
I'm
they kind
sure.
of make things up. Um, the
Yeah,
police at the concert, winners or losers.
they just looked stupid.
Yes, they
The
did.
senior guy when he turns up,
Right,
it, you can say years of experience there,
right.
because one of those two policemen was interviewed and he was in our local media. I think in the week after it had been
Mm.
sued. I stand by what I said back then. I think I was only doing my job.
You're
Oh,
kidding me.
shut up. No, he was there.
50 years later, he's still standing by. Really?
Job's worth. Told you.
Jobs worth.
They just
Oh,
look stupid.
yeah,
Really
they did.
stupid.
Quite silly. We've got 30 complaints. I think, come on.
Yeah.
It's a bit arbitrary. Really? I don't know. It's the Beatles, for goodness sakes. Yeah.
Nuts.
Certainly, winners and losers, we can all say vindicated. Yoko is very much vindicated here.
Yeah.
I feel. Um, I'm just we were just told. I don't know if you ever read a book by Frederick Seaman. It's called The Last Days of John Lennon.
I've seen it. I've read bits of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was John's assistant until he passed in New York, and he
Yeah.
doesn't. This is sometimes later, of course. This is June of '80, right? But he frames a kind of a different vision of Yoko, but it was a very different time. But I just
Mm.
happened to send it to a friend, so I thought of it. But yeah, Yoko is certainly vindicated. I mean, even Mal Evans and these kinds of surrounding people are all. I can't think of any other. We say winners and losers. I know that's kind of extreme. I think of the police. I think of the press as the losers. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody else is a winner. I mean, any thoughts on that?
I think I think Paul as well comes out a lot
Mm,
better because again, one of
right.
those stories that's put on is that Paul was domineering, Paul was taking charge. Now the way they edited it, Paul was getting a bit uppity, and he was telling
Mm.
John to shut up, which
A
was
couple
just
times.
pushing it a little bit far.
Right, right.
And then you see George leaving, but I didn't see him being domineering and trying to. I'm the manager. I'm behind this. We should do
Right.
this. Do that. Do that. It wasn't like that. Everything he was trying to do was for the good of the Beatles. He was trying to keep the project going. He was trying to keep them together. And you can see, he's the guy who's having all those discussions with Michael Lindsay Hogg
Right.
um, on behalf of the others. But he didn't come across like I was sort of expecting him to,
Mm.
which are a bit too sort of school teacherish. Um, that didn't come over, so I was quite glad about that as well. So again,
Right.
he's a winner for me.
You're right. I have a completely different. I shouldn't say completely, just a different vision of
Yeah.
Paul. And yeah, I keep on bringing up Brian Wilson. By the way, somebody else mentioned Brian Wilson, and I put that together. That's not my thought, but
Mm.
Ron Bennington actually did. But yeah, Paul is very much there, and John. Now I want to watch it all over again. How many times
Oh
have you
yeah,
gone through it?
twice.
Yeah.
That won't be enough. There is so
Right.
much, and first time through, I didn't make many notes, and then I thought, no, I'll make some more notes because there is just so much in there,
Yeah.
and I'll have missed stuff.
Of course.
So next time through,
Do you think
but I
Jackson
mean,
puts out more hours? You think because there's more of it.
I don't think you'd need to, because I think we've covered all the important events.
Right.
We've got the chronology, and again, just a simple thing he was doing for drama was putting the calendar up.
Right. That was
So
very
many
good.
days to go.
The
Brilliant.
animation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was simple. It was a
nice and
calendar,
simple.
there was circles, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, there was no real kind of narration. Again, there was no talking heads giving their
No,
opinions on what's
brilliant.
happening. We get to see the
Oh,
actual evidence. We get to see the proof. We don't
yeah.
does this documentary like put all the other Beatles related documentaries? I mean, there's so many that got wrong, even the montage in the beginning, right? As you have mentioned. I mean,
Yeah.
do you look at those other documentaries differently now?
Um,
I guess it's
difficult
wide.
to say, because
Yeah.
I think the only thing you can really compare it to is anthology.
Hmm.
Um, that I think anthology was a
That was
little bit more
crazy.
contrived,
Right.
because each bit of that, and I always describe it as the story of the Beatles as they want you to know it.
Mm.
They were fully in control of everything there, whereas here they weren't, because it's sort of like the first bit of reality TV. No, and they just do this, and everything happens, and it's not really directed as such, because they're creating it as they go through. So I think that the closest thing you can say is anthology.
Yeah.
Um, but it stands on its own. It was just genius.
A chill moment that I have in my notes is when Paul starts playing Martha, My Dear. So they had
Yeah,
released this and he's just on the piano and he's just dun dun dun, about his dog. We all know. And
yeah,
one of my favorite songs. And I just remember myself just getting chills. I mean, there's so many of those points. Even the way Ringo would always put cloth over his snare to kind
yeah,
of soften, he
yeah,
didn't want the, and John, sometimes he'd slap in the beginning of Get Back, he's slapping the
yeah,
strings to kind of
yeah.
build that momentum in. I don't know how practical that is. It's just so many of those subtleties that we learned from those four geniuses
Mm,
that I just can't get enough of.
yeah, yeah.
David
It,
Bedford,
it, it
thank you
is.
so much.
It was watching a
It
great
really
bit
is.
of music history.
And I would just 50 years later, why was this sitting there? Why, we get to see this and get some insight on these four men and how
Yeah,
much they loved each other and how they made music. It's just,
that was it. All about the music.
it really is. At the end of the day, it's about the music, and it's just, oh my goodness, it was so good, so good.
It was.
David Bedford, thank you so much. I love these conversations with you. I can't wait to sit down and have a drink with you. Hopefully in the new year. And thank you so much for your time and
My pleasure.
such a great insight. I didn't. It didn't. The biggest shock from this conversation was all those inaccuracies in that in the beginning. I didn't pick up on it at all. But I really enjoy your time and I enjoy you, my friend. You be well.
Yeah.
And I look forward to having a drink face to face with you.
You take care. Have a lovely Christmas.
You
Happy New
too.
Year, and we'll do this again.
Absolutely. Very good. Be well. Bye now.
Take care.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.